All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, oftentimes you can tell a lot about an era based off of who the most popular athlete in that era was. At the turn of the 20th century, in the 19 teens, arguably the most popular athlete in all of America, if not the world, was Jack Johnson, the so-called black heavyweight champion. And I say he was the most popular because he was the most loved and the most hated at the same time. And during that era, what was it known for? It was known for the reinvigoration of the Ku Klux Klan. You had a president during that time, that being Mr. Woodrow Wilson, who invited the Ku Klux Klan down to the White House and was an unofficial member of the Klan. He also was heavily involved in a lot of the modifications made around the banking system in America, but that's another topic for another day. The most popular athlete in the 1930s and 1940s was Joe Louis. Joe Louis, by the way, was a Luciferian. He was a high-degree Mason, and he pretty much encapsulated what they wanted from so-called black men during that time, which was to entertain, but to always make sure that they stepped on the line and never over the line. Joe Louis was given very detailed instructions by his manager, Mr. Jim Jacobs, to make sure that when he knocked someone down, to never stand over them, never celebrate. And he was informed of what to say in all the post-fight press conferences to the media, because they did not want to be reminded about Jack Johnson, a person who did not give a shit about what anyone thought about him. And oftentimes, Jack Johnson would infuriate the mass media and the American public at large, the white majority, quote unquote, by flagrantly parading his Caucasian women around with him, to the point where they even passed antitrust laws in America to stop him from transporting Caucasian women across state lines. And by the way, Sylvester Stallone has recently sought out a pardon for Jack Johnson. He made a request to Donald Trump a couple of days ago. I'm not sure if that's going to be put through or not. But just moving forward, in the 1950s, the most popular athletes were Rocky Marciano, Mickey Mantle, and they were associated with the boom of America. The 1950s was the golden age of America. So that's why you very rarely ever heard anything controversial about Rocky Marciano or Mickey Mantle. We didn't find out that Mickey Mantle was a sex addict and an alcoholic until he was damn near dead, because that was the era. In the 1960s, of course, you had the great Muhammad Ali, you had Jim Brown, you had Bill Russell. And what was that era known for? That was the start of the counterculture movement, where the masses of people, oftentimes led by so-called black athletes, started to push back. We can jump over into the 1980s, where you had the emergence of the corporate athlete, that being Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan. They were going to make sure that they made their money. They were great pitchmen. That was an era in which a lot of the rabble-rousing, quote-unquote, that became associated with so-called blacks in the 1960s started to become dormant. The 1990s was the me era. Of course, that also was consistent with Barry Bonds, the image that has been portrayed of Michael Jordan, Jerry Rice, Barry Sanders. All they were about, at least how they were depicted, was their numbers, making sure that they won championships. They were totally devoted to their sport. They wanted nothing to do with anything racial. At least that is the image that has been portrayed about them, because they were products of their era. And that's something that brothers should always consider before you castigate someone. Always focus on the era that they came up in, because the era that you come up in, the time period that you're raised in, is always going to determine how you think, how you react, how you respond. Now, Allen Iverson, Randy Moss, Michael Vick, they were part of the quote-unquote thug era of the late 90s into the early 2000s, in which they decided that they were going to wear cornrows, baggy jeans, diamond-studded bracelets and chains, platinum watches, so on and so forth. That was the Jay-Z, DMX hip-hop era. And in sports, those athletes truly typified that era. And I think that Allen Iverson has been able to last so long in the subconscious of many so-called black men who grew up in that era, because he was rebellious for rebelliousness' sake. He was, as I call him, an agent of chaos. There's no doubt about that. And many people may disagree with me, but I think that one of the most important hallmarks of the Iverson era is when the NBA pushed back against him. Because that era in the early 2000s threatened to cripple everything that the NBA had done to grow their league from the 80s into the 90s, from the Magic and Bird era into the Jordan era, where Jordan initiated the hero ball era from wing players, but he did it with such flair and charisma that people almost forgot that he was a me-first ball player, but he made it look so good because he was so proficient at it. You had a slew of players who came into the league in the late 90s, led by Allen Iverson, Kobe Bryant, Vince Carter, Tracy McGrady, who were trying to play that style, and it was hurting the league. And then on top of that, they had embraced the so-called thug style of hip-hop. Please understand that hip-hop had been one of the mainstream forms of music in the black community, so-called black community, since the mid-'80s. But it had not embraced the so-called thug element until NWA in the late 80s. And then in the mid-'90s, you had Tupac Shakur, who came and took it to another level. The first hip-hop basketball team, in my view, was the UNLV Running Rebels, led by Larry Johnson and Greg Anthony, Anderson Hunt, Charles Shackelford, so on and so forth. Then, of course, you had the Fab Five, and from there, those players left college and came into the NBA. And to me, that crescendoed with Allen Iverson. And they realized with Allen Iverson that they had to do something very quickly, or they were going to hurt their league, because the image that he was conveying to the viewing audience was not something that was palatable if you wanted to maintain a nationwide market. Very similar to the issues that the NFL had the last 2 seasons with Colin Kaepernick. So Iverson is always going to be a divisive figure. There are a lot of brothers who grew up during that time period who hold him near and dear to their hearts. To me, and I'm on record as saying this, he was what Russell Westbrook is today, except he was far more left than Russell Westbrook is today. Russell is wild on the court, but not off the court. Iverson was trying to carry that energy off the court, and he was an agent of chaos. Well, anyway, he sat down with Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman to discuss a myriad of topics, starting with himself as well as his view of the NBA. So they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Number 3, Allen Iverson. With the first pick in the 1996 NBA draft, the Philadelphia 76ers select Allen Iverson. Iverson has Jordan. The crowd is into it. Allen shades free. Gets 2. Wow, what a fake on Daniels.
Allen Iverson is one of the greatest natural athletes of the last 30 years. He was a blue chip prospect in both basketball and football in high school. He was a #1 recruit in both basketball and football. That's why I liken him so much to Russell Westbrook in regards to that archetype that they both filled. And anybody who watched Allen Iverson play, even though he gets overly glorified now, because as usual, after players are gone, their reputation tends to become inflated. But during his time period, he was what he was. He was a guy who was going to come out in the game. If he shot 15 of 35, he had a good game. If he shot 50%, he had a great game. More often than not, Allen was going to shoot somewhere around 14 for 35. And people were going to say, wow, did you see that crossover? That's what he was. Now, he played in a much more physical era, so we have to give him that. I have to give him that much credit, that much understanding in regards to the difference in style of the NBA today as opposed to back then when it was much more physical in that era. That era was the most physical era in NBA history, not the 80s. The late 90s going into the early 2000s was the most physical era in NBA history. And then you compound that with the fact that there was so little ball movement. That's what was hurting the league. There was just a big cornucopia of issues that the NBA had at that time that they had to resolve, and they did a good job of resolving it. Because that's why they are where they are today. Because they got rid of a lot of that quote-unquote thug culture that was destroying the so-called black community. So if it was destroying the so-called black community, how could it help the NBA? That's just bad business.
I think I've done a lot for the city of Philadelphia, the city has done a lot for me.
It's a basketball city. They love it. They're passionate about it. I just want them to be happy.
These fans here, they saw my up.
That was the greatest moment of his career when he made that shot and then stepped over Tyronn Lue. Everything was pretty much downhill after that.
My ups, they saw my downs. That's special to me.
And let me also say this. Allen Iverson probably did the most with what he was given of any player or any athlete in the last 25 years.
Getting hyped just watching that. Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons may be the face of the 76ers right now, but no one will ever forget the one and only Allen Iverson. Changed the game, 11-time All-Star, former MVP, Hall of Famer, and the man who carried the Sixers on his back for years is now with us. AI, so appreciate you hanging out there in Philly with Stephen A. I will send it out to you guys.
Well, one of the reasons why AI carried the 76ers for all those years was because he would not allow anyone else to share the spotlight. And of course, the cult of personality that he's been able to create and cultivate and maintain will always state that, well, AI never had any help. When he first got to the Sixers, there was already help there in the form of Jerry Stackhouse. He didn't want Jerry Stackhouse there because he wanted the spotlight all to himself. And he did not want to be a point guard, no matter what he says or any of his fans say. He ran Jerry Stackhouse off so that he could take over. And that is why he and the coach, Larry Brown, used to go back and forth like cats and dogs. Even after Larry Brown decided to conciliate some of Allen Iverson's demands to shoot and to attention monger by making Eric Snow the point guard. They still will go back and forth like cats and dogs because it was very obvious to those who were observant and objective that their personalities were not going to mesh because the both of them were way too high strung, and Larry Brown and Allen Iverson are both divas.
Thank you, Molly. What's going on, Big Time? How you doing?
What's up, Big Dog?
Listen, first of all, before we get into these playoffs, I want to know what you've been doing, what you've been up to, because I see you at these Sixers games, but I also know you had the second annual Allen Iverson Round Ball Classic. What have you been up to?
Been working. Hold on, first and foremost, Max, I heard what you said. Somebody called me already and said this was too early. And you was wrong this time, just like you were wrong about Tom Brady.
Oh, like Tom Brady. Okay, we'll see. Right. We'll see if I'm wrong this season, AI.
We'll see if I'm wrong this season, AI. Max trying to do his black voice. He was looking scared as hell when Iverson first started calling him out. Max is like, oh shit, what did I do now? AI, don't put a hit on me.
Okay.
But talk to me. What you been doing?
Right now, I'm finishing up my book.
You finishing up your book, brother? Come on, let's be for real. You're finishing up telling someone else who's writing your book what you want to have in there. Just stop.
Renovating the gym in the Boys and Girls Club where I grew up.
Okay.
Doing a lot right now. I just finished my classic this weekend, for the best All-American high school players in the country.
Yeah.
For the most part, just doing my dad duties, man. I'm able now to do a lot more than I did when I was playing. Can be a lot more hands-on, picking them up from school, taking them to school, practice and stuff like that.
Let me say this also, and I'll probably touch on this when I do the Khalees video in regards to the situation with her and Nas. It's amazing to me that so many of these females will get married to professional athletes and or entertainers and then get frustrated by the fact that they're not hands-on dads. You should already understand when you decide to get inseminated by an athlete, an entertainer, that he's not going to be around. That's part and parcel of what you signed up for. That's part of his job description, is that he has to maintain an image for the masses. So it is what it is. But Iverson states that now he's pretty much a stay-at-home dad. Hopefully that's enough to satiate his competitive fire, because it's still there. And for athletes who participated on the level that he participated on and who had the competitive fire that he has, that's something that never dies. And oftentimes, so many of these former athletes turn to drugs and alcohol because they have a hard time dealing with the fact that they can no longer dominate and attention monger because of their dominance like they once could. Even Jordan himself, you could look at him and see that there was a while where he had alcohol and maybe harder issues. When you look at his eyes and his skin, it seems like he's a little healthier now. But there was a stretch about 5 years ago where Jordan looked like there may have been some type of an intervention that was necessary, allegedly.
Got the I3 collection coming back, so now I get a chance to see the kids. I'll wear my sneakers on the dance floor again, so I'm very excited.
That I3 Reebok collection is going to be special, and no doubt about that. But I do want to know about this book from this perspective. I want to know, you got a book. It almost seems like you done told us everything. What are we going to learn from this book? Because I've been watching you for years, knowing you for years, covering you for years, and you have never been shy about how you feel. So what is this book going to tell us?
Just a lot of personal.
A lot of nigga nonsense stories that you're going to tell. Let's be for real, brother. You're going to talk about how many times somebody pulled a gun out on you, or you pulled a gun out on somebody else, or how close you got to getting kicked out of the league, and how many women you slept with. Let's be for real. That's all it's going to be in the book.
Personal things that I didn't talk about throughout my career, from my perspective.
In your words.
In my words. I get to tell my own story. You know what I mean? You believe it or you don't. You know what I mean?
And you're really going to talk about how big of a fuck up you were and how fortunate you are to still be alive. And I've mentioned this before. Allen Iverson, he's probably the most talented fuck up in professional sports history. And I state that with all due respect. Once again, he's probably gotten the most out of what was given to him, out of what he was blessed with, to be, 5'11", maybe 6 feet, and be one of the NBA's all-time most prolific scorers, and to have reached the NBA Finals, and to have been able to win a game against one of the greatest postseason teams in NBA history, that being the 2001 LA Lakers. But his stubbornness and his pig-headedness and his unwillingness to share the spotlight cost him an opportunity to have a realistic chance to win an NBA championship, because he never was fully invested in understanding the NBA game. All he was infatuated with was his one-on-one abilities. And by the time he was truly ready to invest mentally and spiritually and psychologically into winning an NBA title, it was already too late. And for a player of his stature, and when I say his stature, I'm talking about his physical stature, to not want to commit to the NBA model of winning championships early on in his career, all he did was hurt himself. So he's had to embrace this anti-hero legacy, because he never won shit, and he probably could have won something had he been more conciliatory to some of the better coaches that he's had, whether it be a George Karl or a Larry Brown, when he's had the opportunity. He ended up with the Detroit Pistons, making a mockery of himself.
You know what I mean? But it's going to come from the heart. Different things that people don't know anything about. I think it's going to be a book for a lot of kids and adults to learn from. You know, the do's and the do's and don'ts. Some of the mistakes that I made, some of the mistakes I've overcome. I think people are going to enjoy it, and I've been having fun doing it. You know what I mean? Because it's a good feeling to open up about a lot of things.
Gotcha. Go.
And let me also say this: at the end of the day, the Allen Iverson story is a success story. For him to be a brother who came out of the environment that he came out of, and was raised in the type of environment that he was raised in, to be considered one of the most famous athletes in American sports in the last 20 years, and thankfully for him and for his family to still be alive, to be there for his children, he is a success story. To me, I synchronize him with Randy Moss and also with Michael Vick. That's why I mentioned them as encapsulating that era of the late 90s into the early 2000s. The guys who oftentimes did not give a fuck, because that was the type of mind control that the music was putting people under at that time, especially the so-called black man. And both of them, Allen Iverson and Randy Moss, came from very similar environments. And thankfully for them, they were able to transcend a lot of the bullshit, and they were able to transcend a lot of their own bullshit. So they were blessed for that.
Go ahead, Max.
Yeah, you ever, in your retirement, watch the league nowadays and think, damn, this league, because for some players, the league has changed in a way that's bad for them. But when you played point guard, people are like, that's not the way you're supposed to play point guard. And yet, in fact, nowadays, it's a primary ball handler who can attack the basket, get to the paint, make decisions and all that. And offenses on great teams are designed around that guy. You ever look at the league now and think, I missed my era? This should have been my era?
If Iverson played today, he would have a field day because basically you only have to beat one man and then you're at the cup. So he would probably average around 32, 33 points a game on a higher field goal percentage, but he would not be any more successful in regards to winning than he was back in his era, because the teams that win in this era play a style of basketball that he would not be comfortable with, because if he was not ready to acclimate himself to a winning style of basketball back in the early 2000s, he would not do anything near that in this era where you have to pass the ball a lot, move without the basketball, and be willing to make hockey assists and hockey passes and not be concerned with getting the credit for assists. And not that AI was ever a big assist guy, but he is someone who always wants to be the hub of whatever's going on offensively. So, yes, he would average a lot of points today, and he'd probably shoot a higher percentage, but his teams would not be any more successful. Not unless he was raised in a different background where he was taught the importance of team basketball, which he never seemed to understand while he was playing.
No, I think my era was my era. You know what I mean? I did pretty good.
You did great, but I mean, yeah, go ahead.
It's definitely evolving, man, and it's getting more and more exciting. You know, I love the space that the league is in. You know what I mean? The superstars are definitely performing like superstars. We should be proud of our game, man. You know what I mean? And I think
good for you for being so positive, bro.
I think it's only going to get better and better. I think the commissioner is doing a great job.
He's all right. He's super liberal and a pansexual, allegedly.
And you know, I'm positive thinking about the whole thing, and it's still must-see TV.
Do you find yourself looking at these Philadelphia 76ers, looking at these young boys? I mean, listen, the bottom line is this. We love from Aaron McKee to Eric Snow to George Lynch to Dikembe Mutombo, Theo Ratliff before him, the crew. We were both there, obviously. But looking at this team, this Philadelphia 76ers team, you don't find yourself sitting back sometimes going like this, damn, if only I was here right now?
Wow.
To do what? To be J.J. Redick? Because that's what he would have to be. Allen Iverson was not a spot-up jump shooter. He was a scorer. He would slow down what they were trying to do. Once again, many of these people in the liberal sports media like to mythologize these athletes. That's why it's important to view, to observe on your own, because they love to create, fabricate, and mythologize.
Wow. I definitely get excited about seeing those guys. They play the right way.
That's true. And brother, to be quite frank with you, you didn't play the right way.
I'm definitely a big,
at least not to win basketball games in the long term.
Big fan. You know what I mean? Very supportive of those guys. I mean, we back like we left some. You know what I mean? I'm definitely looking forward to us finishing out this series and doing big things. I think our time is now. It's not a.
What does that mean?
I think
championship?
Definitely.
Now?
Why not? Why not us? Why not?
I think that they have as good a chance as any team in the Eastern Conference to get to the finals. Can they beat the Warriors or the Rockets? No, I don't think so. But we'll see.
Why not? I think we got the talent, we got the coaching staff, and we definitely got the fan support.
Molly?
Hey, you think they could actually win the finals this year?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's going to be tough. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But I just think we're talented enough. Anything can happen in the series. I know there's some juggernauts out west, and it's going to be tough for us to get out of the East. But I think we believe in each other. You know what I mean? I think we really believe. I don't think it's a facade. You know what I mean? I think these guys feel that they can do it. You know what I mean? If you don't feel that way, then how can you accomplish something like that?
Philadelphia has a great squad right now. Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid as the leaders, as the pillars. They have J.J. Redick as a knockdown jump shooter who also can hold his own defensively. They also have Saric and Ilyasova, who not only can stretch the floor, but can get physical on the inside, can fight for rebounds. Covington can stretch the floor and guard his man. They have a great mix right now. I just don't think that this year is their year. I think that they need one more year of seasoning.
I know, before I get to you, Max, I got to ask you a question because I'm not going to get into how I feel. You've argued with me about this enough off the air, but I will ask you this question, Allen Iverson, just so you can alert our listeners, our viewers, to what you feel. How do you feel about the process? And when the fans are chanting the process, trust the process, how do you feel about the process that is taking place in Philadelphia and what you had to go through to get there?
I feel good about it because I feel like, unlike you know, people like myself and the rest of the fans in Philadelphia, you know, they believed in it. You know what I mean? We trust the process. And obviously, it's looking good. Obviously,
see what I have to deal with, Max?
The right way to go.
See what I have to deal with, Max? That's what I got to deal with, Max.
I see.
He knows that's why he's laughing, because it's not the first time I hear more from him than you.
I told you.
Stephen A. tried to pull Philly credentials on me, bona fides, and say, oh, I wrote for this many years. I'm telling you, Philly didn't like the process, blah, blah, blah. But you're saying Philly did like the process, didn't they? That the fans understood it, didn't they? You got Embiid and Simmons out of the process.
Well, it's easy right now for the fans of the Philadelphia 76ers to allege that they always believed in the process because now it's starting to pay back dividends. But I remember a lot of paper bags over the heads of Philadelphia 76er fans back in 2014, 2015, and 2016. But it is what it is. All's well that ends well, I guess.
We're believers.
You always, when y'all were losing winning 28 games in 2 years, what was it like then?
You know what? It was tough. It was tough. But when you're a basketball head like myself, and I thought you were.
You said your head looked like a basketball, Stephen A. That's what it meant.
You be quiet, let him speak. Go ahead, man.
Stephen A. Smith do kind of have a basketball head. If you take off that hairpiece in the back,
we realized,
hold it on for dear life.
Realized how much of a great coach we had. We knew what type of guy that we had in there. You know what I mean? He's cut from that cloth. He's been around Pop. Want to definitely send my condolences to Pop and his family and friends and everybody that loved her. But I think we were pointing in the right direction. Obviously, all of this paid off. So you got to take your hat off to the organization, man. They're doing a super job.
Go ahead, Max.
Hey, I want to circle back to the league nowadays and your influence on it. Take another shot at it. I see your DNA throughout the league. I see Kyrie Irving and the handles and the crossover and all that stuff. I see Westbrook and the unbridled ferocity and all that. Even Steph with the handles. I see your DNA all over the league. What do you see? How do you feel about that when you see your influence in the modern NBA?
Well, without a doubt, Allen Iverson has had an essential impact on the NBA and everything that has come after it. There's no doubt about that, particularly in how many of the small men play with their elite level face-up game. That's just something that you did not see throughout the 80s into the 90s, at least not on the level that you see it today. Now, you have many point guards who could break their man down. Kevin Johnson, Mark Price, of course, the great Isaiah Thomas. But not with the consistency that we see it all across the NBA today. Back then, back in the 80s and 90s, when you had guards who could do that, they were considered elite, the elite of the elite. Now, just to make the NBA, you have to have some of that in your game. And much of that is owed to the impact of Allen Iverson.
It's the greatest feeling in the world. It's the greatest feeling in the world. You know, especially when you see those guys, you go to games, and, you know, they express to me how much they look up to me and how they try to, you know, emulate me and my play. It's a beautiful thing, man. I think it's a blessing. You know what I mean? I think one of the dopest things for me is, you know, coming from doing this classic and, you know, seeing these kids and talking to them and interacting with them and they hanging on to every word. It's a beautiful thing. I share my moments being in the NBA, the things that I went through off of the basketball court, the things that I had to learn from to get better in, to develop myself as a better man, and things like that is very special to me.
What were those things? What were those things? What were those things that you had to learn to be a better man?
Just my decision making.
Well, that's good. That's the first step because you were a terrible decision maker, brother. There's no doubt about that. But thank the Most High. He blessed you with the abilities and the talent that he blessed you with. But there's no doubt that you were a horrific decision maker throughout much of your life. You were an agent of chaos throughout your own life and throughout much of the NBA. And I'm sure that many of his more ardent fans are going to get upset about me saying that, but it's just the truth. It is just the truth. And one of the wiser things that the NBA did in the early 2000s, and I remember being a much younger man at that time and feeling like much of it was racially motivated, but as you grow up and you understand business and you understand the impact and the necessity to make sure that your market base is pleased with your product, you cannot allow someone to bring in a culture into your business that is not even a beneficial culture within his own community. Just is what it is. But you know what? I'm going to continue this on part 2. Peace.